Okay, I'm very happy to be here. I've admired the work coming out of the UConn logic group for a long time. So I'm very happy to hear what you think. This is a companion talk to the one I gave at the meeting group on Wednesday, where we were talking about atomic sentences. Now we'll talk about something more logically interesting, which is disjunction, negation. So it's a general idea. Let's see, we have something in the chat, but it's okay. General idea is that we want to rethink the basic meaning of possibility, necessity along conditional lines. So the standard theory of modals says possibly A holds just in case the adjacent A is a sentence is true in some world in the relevant domain. It says necessarily A says A is true in every world in the relevant domain, right? Going back to Leibniz or Carnap. And there's three challenges I want to focus on for the standard theory. One is very well known, free choice. If I say Juan may take syntax or semantics, it seems to imply that he may take syntax and he may take semantics. One might take syntax or semantics with an epistemic modal, has the same inferences. One might take syntax, one might take semantics. And the standard theory does not predict these inferences because that would involve going from a weaker statement to a stronger one. And that's exactly what we don't see. If I say one may visit the department, that doesn't imply he may visit the department and burn it down. If I say one may give a talk, it doesn't imply he may give a 5-hour talk. All right. So sometimes you're allowed to strengthen, sometimes you're not. Okay, a related inference building on this is a more involved challenge called independence inferences. One goes back to Paula Menendez-Benito. It's the canasta case. So a player has two options at a certain point in this card game, canasta. Take all of the cards in the discard pile. So there's like a little pile of cards in the middle, or take none of them. And if it seems just not correct to say you may take any cards in the discard pile right now. If that was said out of the blue, it would seem to imply that you may take like the top half of the cards or every second card or, whatever. Or any, if I do it more explicitly, you may take any collection of cards in the discard pile. It's clear that seems to imply that the top half or the first two cards, all of that is good. And then Richard Booth observes similar things for disjunction. If there are just two cards left in the discard pile, A and B, it just seems wrong to say you may take A or B, where the options are take all of them, like both A and B, or take neither. Okay. Now, if we incorporate the free choice inference, these would be 4 and 5 respectively would become, for every collection of cards, you may take that collection, and you may take A and you may take B for the disjunction. And the problem is the standard theory of modals predicts these to be straightforwardly true. And the reason is given on the note on the side. For example, with 6, for every collection of cards, there is like a deontic ideal world or a best world where you take that collection, namely one where you take that collection along with all the other cards. You may take A and you may take B. Well, you may take A is true because in a world where you take both, you are taking A, like it's true that you take A. That world is perfectly acceptable, but yeah. So you may take A is true, you may take B, vice versa is also true. Okay, so then a standard reply has been given, for example, by Menendez-Benito, to say that we have exclusive reading. So it says for every collection of cards in the discard pile, you may take those and only those cards. And if you have this embedded exclusive reading, then you predict that you may take any collection of cards in the discard pile. Implies you may take any those cards and only those cards. And in the canasta case, that's exactly what's false. You can only take all of them or neither. So that would explain why it's bad. Similarly with 5, if we have this embedded exclusive inference, you may take only A, meaning A and not B, or only B, B and not A, then both of those are false. It's not true that you may take only A. It's not true that you may take only B. Okay, that seems to be a pretty satisfactory analysis. Then Anna Sabolci realized that in some cases, actually adding in this exclusive inference results in a contradictory meaning. So she was adopting an example from Paul Elberg. So if we have a sentence like any bishop may meet a bishop, that seems to be a consistent thing that you can say. Like any bishop is allowed to meet a bishop. But if we incorporated the exclusive inference, it would mean with the free choice inference, it would mean for every bishop, it is allowed, for every bishop like A, it is allowed that A meets a bishop and only A meets a bishop. Can you see what is wrong? Why can you see why that's contradictory? Right? Because if A meets a bishop, he's meeting someone, let's say bishop B, but then also B is meeting a bishop, right? So A is not the only one who met a bishop. Okay, so it seems like in this case, the sentence is consistent. So for it to be consistent, there must be no contradictory meaning there. One thing you can say quite simply is that, well, it's a pragmatic inference, like any pragmatic inference. If it gives rise to a contradictory meaning, we just don't derive it. But then there is this issue where you can put canastic case, all or nothing style reasoning and exclusive inferences together. And we'll see what we get. So I see that in 9, for example, 4 people are playing a card game in 2 teams. The allowed actions this round are everyone does nothing, or everyone swaps a card with their teammate. And then you say anyone may swap a card with their teammate. Does this sound? Is it okay to say in this context? So the actions are everyone does nothing or everyone swaps a card. So for example, if one team swaps a card and the other team doesn't, that's like not allowed. Yeah. You say, well, anyone may swap a card with their teammates. Yeah, okay, I see some like unhappy faces here. Yeah, it seems like anyone may swap a card with a teammate seems to imply that it's okay if like only one team does it and the other team doesn't, Now, here's the issue. So we have this canasta style case, all or nothing. If we have an exclusive inference in there, though we have a symmetric predicate, swap a card with a teammate is symmetric. So with exclusive inference, it would say any x is such that x may swap a card with their teammate and only x swaps a card with a teammate. But that's contradictory because swapping is symmetric. If x swaps a card with teammate y is also swapping a card with teammate x. Okay, so we have the exclusive inference is contradictory. But if we don't derive the exclusive inference, what meaning do we predict? Anyone may swap a card with a teammate. Well, for every person x, there is a deontically ideal world where they swap a card with a teammate. And without the exclusive inference, that's just true. Because if you swap a card with a teammate in a world where everyone swaps a card with a teammate, then that's the deontically ideal. That's a world where you swap a card with a teammate. Okay? So basically, I just took the previous 2 puzzles and I mashed them together into one puzzle. And I saw that if you think like Menendez Benito, that exclusive readings are accounting for the canasta case, why we had 4 coming out bad, it seemed like you're in this bind where with the exclusive inference, you get a contradictory reading. Without the exclusive inference, you predict it to be true. And yeah, it seems like just 9 it's false, but not because it's contradictory, just because it doesn't describe the facts. Okay. Anyway, so that's the other puzzle. We can get the same thing. I have another example in 10, but okay, it seems like similar puzzles can arise for disjunction in 11. So suppose in immigration law states, it's very clear with the definition. In this document, Ireland refers to the island consisting of the Republic of Ireland and Northern Ireland. The UK refers to the nation consisting of England, Scotland, Wales, and Northern Ireland. Okay, so there's a little bit of overlap. The law later says, if you hold an e-visa, you may travel to Ireland or the UK. Let's say you want to go to Belfast, which is in the Northern Ireland. Does it allow you to go there? You have an e-visa. Yeah, it seems like anywhere in Ireland or the UK is okay, right? If we incorporate exclusive inference, it would mean 12. If you hold an e-visa, you may visit Ireland but not the UK, or the UK but not Ireland. And this doesn't say anything about going to Northern Ireland. In the same way, it doesn't say anything about going to Germany. Like, if you hold an e-visa, are you allowed to go to Germany? I don't know. Like, who knows? Same with Northern Ireland here, but that's not the reading we observed. There's at least a prominent reading of 11 where it suggests that going to Northern Ireland is fine. Okay. Are there any questions, like clarification questions about this right now?
Yes, I have a question. Does 12 not actually say that you must not visit Northern Ireland, or is that not? Because I mean, if you say Ireland but not the UK, if the UK includes they both include Northern Ireland.
Yeah.
So you are prohibited from going to Northern Ireland and twice over. Is that right? Or
yeah, that would be an additional pragmatic inference, right? Because
Yeah.
it could be in a law context, you would assume that it's giving all the relevant permitted states. So if there was another place that it would allow you to go to, it would have mentioned it. And with that additional pragmatic inference, yeah, you would get that.
Interesting.
Yeah, you're forbidden. But it could be that the next law, says if you hold an F visa, you may blah blah blah, and that could independently entitle you to go to Northern Ireland. So
I'm sorry, I don't understand why it's only a pragmatic inference. Maybe I'm missing something.
yeah, so,
You may not visit the United Kingdom sounds
okay,
more than
yeah,
sounds semantic.
that's a good point. Yeah, yeah. So
I'm not sure it matters
yeah.
for your purpose.
No, I agree. The paraphrase I gave in 12 is actually ambiguous. So one reading is you may visit Ireland, but you may not visit the UK.
Yeah.
That's where it's semantic.
I see. Yeah,
And there's this, the formulation is just,
but it's not the case that you may.
yeah, but there's another one, which is that you may do the following thing, visit Ireland without the UK. And if that's all under the single possibility modal, then it would just, I mean, I should have written it unambiguously. And then 12 would say, if you hold an e-visa, you may visit the Republic of Ireland or Great Britain, because Great Britain is the island that is just that landmass.
Oh, but Ireland exclusive of the UK.
Yeah, the Republic of Ireland is exclusive of
No,
Ireland.
if you you may visit Ireland exclusive of the. I've seen that kind of. That would then it would merely be a pragmatic inference.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Okay, but you're absolutely right. There is a prominent reading of 12 where we have you may visit Ireland, but you may not visit the UK. Like you just add in the hidden modal, and then it's just semantic. So that's a good clarification. Okay. Anyway, that's the second challenge. We're in this bind where with exclusive inferences, we don't want them to apply when we give rights for contradictory meaning, but without them, we predict something to be true that seem to be unacceptable in the context, like we had with example 9, any one may swap a card with a teammate. So how do we get out of this? Okay, the third challenge I want to talk about is hybrid conditionality, where logically equivalent sentences seem to behave differently. So imagine there's a popular concert, like I don't know, Taylor Swift is going to stores, and you so they know the concert is going to be extremely popular, so they don't want to sell all the tickets to one person. So each customer may buy at most 5 tickets to the concert. Is it true that Alice may buy more than 4 tickets? Is she allowed to buy more than 4 tickets? Okay. What about, is she allowed to buy 5 or more tickets? Do you feel anything between 13A and B? Yeah, I don't know. It seems to me like you can say, yeah, she can buy more than 4 tickets because she can buy 5. But if I say, is she allowed to buy 5 or more? Well, no, she's not allowed to buy more than 5, right? Anyway, this was based on an example by Fox I have in the note, but he had John is allowed to smoke more than 6 cigarettes. I changed the example to tickets just because arguably smoking cigarettes is not discrete. You can smoke 6.5 cigarettes, and that's where you smoke more than 6, but you didn't smoke 6, 7 or more. Anyway, but with tickets, it's hard to say what half of 4, like 4.5 tickets would be. I don't know, 4 good tickets and 1 in the back, be like in the rafter. Anyway, but the kicker is that these sentences are logically equivalent. Like Alice buys more than 4 tickets if and only if she buys 5 or more. And if the standard theory just says, okay, there's at least one accessible world, like the ideal world, where this sentence is true, because the sentences have the same truth conditions, you would expect them to behave the same way. Here's another more elaborate case from His Fine. Eve finds herself in alternative Eden. There's one forbidden apple, A0, and infinitely many safe apples, A1, A2, and so on. And we say, Eve may eat infinitely many of the apples, A1, A2, ... like A1, A2, and so on. Is that okay? Let's imagine that she can eat infinitely many apples, okay? Fine, takes care of that worry in a footnote where he says, we can imagine each apple is half the size of the previous one. So at some point, she can just eat infinitely many apples in one gulp. Or she gets twice as fast at eating apples every time. So at some point, she can perform a super task where she eats infinitely many apples in like finite time. Okay. So yeah, if you're worried about that, thankfully we have this footnote to make it realistic. Okay. Okay, but then 14b, what do you think about that? It may eat infinitely many of the apples, A0, A1, A2, that's it. Like, is she allowed to do that? What do you think? No? People.
It was misleading.
It seems misleading for sure. And misleading in a way that 14a is not. Yeah, 14A is fine. The only issue there is she might get some indigestion from having so many apples in her tummy. Yeah, so there's a clear difference between these. And again, the statements described are logically equivalent. He eats infinitely many of the apples, A1, A2, dot, dot, dot. If and only if she eats infinitely many of the apples, A0, A1, A2, dot, dot, dot. I mean, these are only logically equivalent, provided that we fix what the apples are, that there are this many apples and stuff. So, of course, we can just add that in to this statement. We can say there are, you just give the setup of the scenario in the sentence. There's one forbidden apple, infinitely many safe apples, A1, A2, dot, 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 and Eve may eat infinitely many of the apples, A1, A2, dot, dot, dot. Okay, if we add in that information like the backgrounds into the sentence, then they really are logically equivalent. Yeah, or we can do it with predicates as well, if that 14 was a bit opaque. The forbidden apple is red, the safe apples are green. There are infinitely many green and only one red. Eve may eat infinitely many of the green apples, seems fine. Eve may eat infinitely many of the apples. There's a worry that she'll eat the forbidden fruit. Okay. Yeah, and so these are logically equivalent because if you only have one red apple and infinitely many green apples, if she eats infinitely many apples, then it has to be that she eats infinitely many green apples. And if she eats infinitely many green apples, it has to be that she ate infinitely many apples. Yeah, I like these examples because it's a way to have sentences that are quite different, like they differ in their subject matter. One is about the green apples, one is about the apples, but they're logically equivalent. So if you're ever in a situation where you have a theory that says that all logically equivalent sentences behave in the same way, it's just fun to plug in this example and see whether they disagree. Yeah, the point is that a difference of one can never separate the finite from the infinite. Okay. So Fine has a response to these kind of cases where he endorses a principle he calls universal realizability for permission. A statement is permitted just in case every way for it to obtain is permitted. And his preferred formulation is in truth maker semantics, where the ways for a sentence to obtain are what he calls its exact verifiers, the states that are wholly relevant to the sentence's truth. But there is a problem. Some sentences, like universal realizability for permission, just seems incorrect. Some sentences that differ in their modal status seem to have the exact same verifiers. We had this with the more than 4 versus 5 or more tickets case. If we ask what states, like what parts of the world, are wholly relevant to Alice buying more than 4 tickets, you might want to say, well, it's her buying 5 tickets, 6 tickets, 7 tickets, and so on. If we ask what states are wholly relevant to her buying 5 or more tickets, it would seem to be buying 5 tickets, buying 6 tickets, buying 6. It seems to be the same, right? Obviously, the state space and exact verification are primitives of his theory, so we're free to stipulate this however we want, but on the default understanding, they would seem to have the exact same verifiers as well. Okay, so that would mean that this universal realizability idea, while it works for 15, wouldn't work for 16. And another problem is just this whole idea that we look at all the ways for this sentence to be true seems incorrect. So rather, permission seems to be coarse. Something can be permitted even if some ways for it to obtain are impermissible. So here we have an example in 17. Alice and Bob's are colleagues in Quebec. They both know English and French. Bill 96, which I think is a real law when I looked at this example. It requires them to speak French at work. Some Quebecois jobs require French, like if you're a judge or working in government. But they defy that law by continuing to talk to each other in English. It could be for no particular reason. I don't know. They just decide one day to do it. Are Alice and Bob allowed to talk to each other at work? Or, for a different phrase, does Bill 96 allow them to talk to each other at work? Yeah. It seems fine to say, well, it allows them to talk to each other at work because it allows them to speak French together. If they only spoke English, then they could raise the complaints. This bill is too strong. It doesn't even allow us to talk to each other at work. But as things currently stand, it seems, yeah, it does allow them to talk to each other at work. Yeah, for a more clinical example, 18, there are 2 switches, A and B. Each switch can either be up or down. The rules specify that A must be up, B can be in any position. Okay. Yeah. So yeah, you just have 2 switches, up, be up or down. So all the rules say is that A has to be up. B, we don't care. Are the positions of the switches allowed to agree? Yeah, seems like, yeah, they can both be up. It's fine. But then we ask, is every way for Alice and Bob to talk to each other at work allowed? But if the ways are talking French at work, talking English at work, then no, talking English at work is not allowed. And in fact, I added this stipulation that they happen to be actually talking together in English, because you could think maybe contextual relevance plays a role, but surely if any world is contextually relevant, the actual world is, the world where they're talking to each other in English, and that defies the law. Similarly, with 18, if are all the positions of the switches allowed, like where they agree? Is every way for them to agree allowed? Well, both being down is not allowed. Okay, so it just seems like universal realizability is incorrect. If we do it in terms of conditionals, like if they agreed, would the rules be met? Maybe, maybe not. If Alice and Bob talk to each other at work, would they be following the rules? Well, in the actual case, not. So there are definitely some salient cases where they break the rules. Okay, those are the three challenges I want to get to. So now we'll look at the preferred analysis that I want to propose. Something I call conditional modality that's been proposed for a long time, at least since the 1950s. So on this perspective, if you ask something like, may I open the window? You're not asking what the standard theory thinks you're asking. Is there at least one allowed case in which I open the window? That's my paraphrase of the standard theory. It's really asking something like, would it be okay if I opened the window? So here we have the split between a conditional antecedent, if I open the window, which takes us to some worlds that result from supposing that, and an evaluative component like okay. So here you just have these two ingredients, conditional interpretation and an evaluation. And this has a long pedigree. Leibniz once defined that what is permitted is what is possible for a good person to do, what is obligatory is what is necessary for a good person to do. Okay, that doesn't seem to involve any conditionals, but Hilpinen later suggested paraphrases Leibniz's thought using conditionals. So the idea is one is permitted to do something just in case if they do it, possibly they're a good person. One is obligated to do something just in case if they don't do it necessarily, they're not a good person. Similarly, not with ought, State Kanger said that ought A means that what morality prescribes strictly implies A. So necessarily, if A is false, morality's prescriptions have not been met. Okay. Alan Ross Anderson developed this view quite extensively in the 50s. He said, to say P is obligatory is to say that failure of P leads to a state of affairs which is bad, or it is analytic of the notion of obligation that if an obligation is not fulfilled, something has gone wrong. Okay, he later wrote. And interestingly, this is remarkably close to how a number of languages typically express permission and obligation. Japanese, Korean, and Burmese. So we have some from Norito Akatsuka in 1992. You can see this for Japanese. Tabe temo I, like literally eat even if good. And Norito's paraphrase is, it is good even if you eat, or you may eat. Obligation, we have, it is not good if you don't eat. That's her paraphrase, which she paraphrases, you must eat. And also, beyond the deontic modality, other people have proposed analyses of modality and conditionals. Tim Williamson analyzes metaphysical possibility, necessity in these terms. Statement is metaphysically necessary just in case were it false, a contradiction would obtain. And possibility is the dual of necessity. Williamson liked this analysis because he thought metaphysical possibility and necessity seem very outre, like remote. We don't have a good grasp on what is necessary, metaphysically necessary or possible. But for Williamson, he said, well, we use counterfactuals all the time. It's part of our ordinary repertoire of reasoning. So we wanted to try to naturalize metaphysical modality in some way by bringing it down to something that's more familiar. Okay, so here I'll just propose a very simple formalization, which is compatible with a wide range of theories of conditionals. F is a conditional selection function, taking at least a proposition and a world and returning a set of worlds. You can add in whatever your favorite parameters are, a causal model, a similarity order. Okay. And we have this box arrow. Here I have these square brackets which indicate the proposition expressed by this sentence A. And we say this box arrow, A box arrow implies C. That's true of the worlds, just in case the consequent is true at every selected antecedent world at W. And then you have this diamond arrow, which is just existential version. The consequent is true at some selected antecedent world. Okay. And then you're free to impose different constraints on this as desired. For example, we want the antecedent to be true at all the selected antecedent worlds, and so on. Okay. I think the remarks I'm going to say will be compatible with a wide range of implementations of this selection function. And we also add in a constant OK, whose analysis is very interesting, but I won't go into for lack of time. They state somehow that the relevant ideals, which could be the optic ideals or epistemic ideals, are met. And then, following Alan Ross Anderson, we say possibly A means if A were true, there would be some case where the relevant ideals are met, like A diamond arrow implies OK. Necessarily A means if A were false, there would be a case where the relevant ideas are met. But here, possibility and necessity are duals, just like in the standard theory. Okay. Okay, so that's the implementation. Are there any clarification questions at this point, or anything? It's okay. So now we'll get on to. By the way, I should say I take these arrows just as abbreviations in the meta language. I'm not trying to describe a logical language that has these arrows. It's just a convenient way. If you wanted to write everything in terms of the selection function directly, that would be fine. So I'm not making any commitments about what is the proper logical form of conditionals here. Okay. So how are we going to account for our observations? So there's a long tradition of trying to reduce free choice, this inference from possible A or B to possible A and possible B, to another rule called simplification of disjunctive antecedents, which comes from logical conditionals. The inference from if A or B C to if A C and if B C. For example, if I say, if you took the train or the bus, you would arrive on time. That seems to imply if you took the train, you would arrive on time, and if you took the bus, you would arrive on time. Okay, so there's a long tradition of trying to reduce free choice inferences to SDA. And whether you get this depends on your underlying theory of conditionals. So the strict conditional, where you have a box over a material conditional, that validates SDA out of the box. Just because we have, if you have material conditional A or B, C, well, that would imply the A, if A then C, and if B then C. Okay. The variably strict conditional, associated with Stalnaker and Lewis, that doesn't validate SDA automatically, but it does if you add some additional constraints. So there was this was pointed out quite soon after Lewis's book, that the theory, like Lewis's theory by itself, doesn't validate SDA, but it does if you say that worlds where the closest worlds where A is true, where A is one of the disjuncts, the closest worlds where the other disjunct are true, are equally close to the actual world. So if it's an example like if you took the train or the metro, you'd arrive on time. The closest worlds where you take the train or the metro includes worlds where you take the train and worlds where you take the metro. Okay. But one thing that is very clear is that the existential conditional does not validate SDA. So this idea of trying to reduce free choice to SDA would not work for the diamond. But it seems like the diamond is actually what we want for permission. That's because of these cases we had earlier where we showed the permission was coarse, like the switches are allowed to be in the same position. There's at least one case where if we ask if the switches were in the same position, would the rules be met? Well, if they're both up, yes. If they're both down, no. And it seems like the statement was just true. So we want to have an existential test for permission. Whereas other people, for example, Von Richt, Hilpinen, and Lee have proposed strong permission, where necessarily all the worlds we get from supposing the statement result in worlds where the rules are met. That would predict that, for example, the bill does not permit them to talk to each other at work. Because if they talk to each other at work, maybe there are some worlds where they speak English, some worlds where they speak French. And it's not true that in every case, the rules are met. Okay? So we want weak permission. But now we have this puzzle. We want weak permission, but that's not going to get us SDA. And it's clear that it doesn't validate like if A or B diamond box are okay to if A diamond box are okay, B diamond box are okay. And that's just because if there's some worlds where, like some A or B worlds, selected A or B worlds that follow the rules, that doesn't imply that for both selected A worlds, they follow the rows, and selected B worlds, they follow the rows. I can draw a picture on the board, or if it's clear to, I don't know, it's okay. Do you see why we don't get that? It's just because you have an existential test. It's like if I say someone passed syntax or semantics, that doesn't imply that someone passed syntax and someone passed semantics, right? Or someone like ate my sandwich or drank my coffee, that doesn't imply that someone ate my sandwich and someone drank my coffee. Okay, but actually there is a way out to have our cake and eat it, to have weak permission, but also have a kind of universal character where we're looking at all the ways for the disjunction to hold, and that's called alternatives. So there's an idea that conditional antecedents are interpreted by a set of propositions, which are called their alternatives. It goes back to Luis Alonso Ovalle. And we say that a conditional statement holds, so now I'm at the topic 6, a conditional statement holds just in case it holds for upon supposing each of its alternatives. So this would really, this mechanism really enforces the idea that you have this universal quantification over alternatives in the conditional. And then we can say, we can just write what are the alternatives for different sentences. Like for a disjunctive conditional antecedent, the alternatives could be the individual disjuncts A and B. So the alternatives to a disjunction are the individual disjuncts. If you take that line, then you would predict that if you take the train or the metro, you'll arrive on time. You have the antecedent, take the train or the metro, that has two alternatives, take the train, comma, take the metro. And you would plug in each alternative and then see if the conditional holds for that. So if you take the train, you'll arrive on time, and if you take the metro, you'll arrive on time. So it's a way of forcing SDA without changing your underlying theory of conditionals, just adding in this like alternative layer on top. Okay, so in terms of formalization, one way to do it, I can do it in a first order inquisitive semantics. I do it first order because I want to account for any, which is an existential quantifier according to a lot of people. Inquisitive semantics is just I'm not exactly wedded to one particular formalization. I just wanted it to be more precise. So the idea is that instead of each sentence denoting a set of worlds, like the set of worlds where it's true, it denotes a set of states where each state is in turn a set of possible worlds. So the idea is that you have like multiple states in the denotation, and then these alternatives are recovered as the maximal states. So I can draw a picture of this. I don't know, is there a whiteboard markers?
Oh. I actually have markers.
Okay, I'll put it up here so you can.
Oh, sorry.
It's great. Okay. Yeah. So you can have a simple toy universe with like a world. We have two atomic letters, A and B. And, so this is a world where A and B are both true, only A is true, only B is true, false, okay? And then, so you can have one proposition which is saying that B is true, one proposition saying that A is true, and then the meaning of A or B could be the set of this cell and this cell, okay? There's also another meaning that can be assigned to a disjunction, so this would be sorry. You can have other denotations as well. There's also an operator which is called like a flattening operator, and that just takes the union of all of the cells in the denotation. So that would have one alternative, which is like this. Okay. So this has two alternatives, this set of worlds and this set of worlds. This has one alternative, okay, which is just the union. Okay, so it's called flattening because instead of having this structure with multiple different sets, you get just one alternative. Okay. So, and you could say those are both alternatives for a disjunction. Anyway, so that's the formalization, and then yeah, Ivano Ciardelli has worked on lifting conditionals to inquisitive semantics. So the idea is that we have universal quantification over alternatives in antecedent. He also introduces existential quantification over alternatives in the consequent, and that's because he wants to have a unified framework in which we also account for conditional questions, like if I take the train, what time should I leave? Where you have a question in the consequent, and he wants to deal with questions by multiple alternatives as well. Basically, the denotation of something like when should I leave would be all the states that answer that question. So you leave at 3 p.m., you leave at 4 p.m., or perhaps even you leave at 3 p.m. and it's sunny, if you want to say that also answers your question. Okay, so we can just lift everything where we add in this additional layer of quantification on top of the conditional. So it would say for every alternative of the antecedent, there is an alternative of the consequent, such that every selected antecedent world is a world where the consequent holds, entails the consequent. So that's the box arrow. And then the diamond arrow would be just the existential form. But crucially, all this stuff with alternatives happening is just staying the same. Okay. And the key result of this is that by having all of this alternative layer on top, you would validate SDA even for the diamond arrow, because now the alternatives raised by a disjunction like A or B would be A and B, and then you say that the existential diamond arrow has to hold for each of the alternatives. It has to hold for A, it has to hold for B. Okay. So even though permission is coarse, it also has this like universal quantification on top. Yeah. Okay. And then a special case of this would just be where we plug in OK for the consequent. And given the analysis of possibility, this is gonna just give you free choice automatically. Okay.
Could you share your handout again? Oh, you are sharing.
Yeah. Is it on the Zoom?
I think. Oh, sorry. Yeah. I just didn't see it.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. One other thing we're going to have to add that is kind of non-standard is you're going to have to say something about what happens under negation. Surprisingly, we have this universal quantification over alternatives, right? But if you negate it, you would expect a weak meaning, like there is an alternative such that the negation holds. But surprisingly, when we put conditionals with disjunctive antecedents under negation, you get a strong meaning back. If this is an example from Paulo Santorio, none of my friends would have fun at the party if Alice or Bob went. That seems to imply none of my friends would have fun at the party if Alice went. None of my friends would have fun at the party if Bob went. Okay? If I say, yeah, I doubt you'll get an extension if you ask Professor A or B. That seems to imply don't bother asking A, don't bother asking B, And similarly, with free choice, we have parallel behavior. If we put this permission statement under negation, we also get a strong inference that you may not have ice cream or cake implies you may not have ice cream and you may not have cake. Okay. You may not take semantics or logic. You may not take semantics, you may not take logic. Okay. And so the way I implement that is you have what we can call a homogeneity presupposition. So we assume that there's this assumption that for all of the alternatives, they behave in the same way with respect to what comes later. So the what comes later part is just this existential quantification and then the statement. Actually the existential quantification is not important because I'm not dealing with questions. So we can ignore it. But anyway, so you have this idea that all of the alternatives behave in the same way. It's a kind of arbitrariness, like it doesn't matter which alternative you pick, this statement will hold both in a positive and negative environment. Okay. There's also a further parallel between free choice and conditionals in that they seem to give rise to ambiguity in probability contexts. So here's this example from Paulo Santorio again. Alice threw a 6-sided die. Before her throw, Bob bet that the outcome would be 3 or 4. We don't know the outcome, but we hear 2 reports. Mary says that it landed 2, 3, or 4. Sue says it landed 3, 4, or 5. We have no idea whether the reports are accurate. I think I should draw a picture. So you have the die. Okay. Okay, and then so Mary says this one. Okay, and then Sue said 3, 4. Okay, so that's how it looks. And then Bob bet that it would be 3 or 4. So this is Bob's bet. And now we have the sentence 24. If if Mary's report is accurate or Sue's report is accurate, probably Bob won. Okay, it's a bit of a math rule. If Mary's report is accurate or Sue's report is accurate, probably Bob won. Does it have a true reading here? Yeah. It's where we suppose each report in isolation. First, we suppose, okay, what happens if Mary's report is accurate? Okay, well then it's 2, 3, or 4, and then there's a 2 in 3 chance that it landed, that Bob was right. Okay. 2 1/3, that's enough to be probably. Let's say probably just means greater than half. What about Sue's report? Oh, it's the same. 2 in 3 chance. You can even make it more specific and say, if Mary's report is accurate or Sue's report is accurate, there's a 2 in 3 chance that Bob won. Like that has a true reading. Okay. Now it's also true that disjunction doesn't have to have this reading. We have 25. If I say if the die landed 2, 3, or 4, probably Bob won. Or if the die landed 2, 3, or 4, there's a 2 in 3 chance that Bob won. Does that also have a true reading? Like if the die landed 2, 3, or 4, there's a 2 in 3 chance that he won. Yeah, I feel it has this reading as well, right? But if we suppose each disjunct independently and then check it, it's not going to be true. If I say, well, that would mean if it landed 2, there's a 2 in 3 chance that he won. If it landed 3, there's a 2 in 3 chance that he won. If it landed 4, there's a 2 in 3 chance that he won. You know, but that's wrong because if it landed 2, there's a 0 chance that he won. You know, if it landed 3, there's a 1 full chance that he won. Okay, so it seems like you get some ambiguity where there's 2 different readings here. One is where you suppose each disjunct separately. One is where you just take the information all together. In this framework that I'm proposing, they would correspond to these 2 readings of disjunctions. Supposing each disjunct independently would amount to this. Supposing all the disjuncts, like all the information together, would amount to this flattening operation. Okay, that's conditionals. Now, one thing that hasn't been observed before is that it seems like free choice, like the way possibility interacts with disjunction, behaves in an exactly parallel fashion. Here's a case. It's time for dessert. Alice's parents play a game to decide what dessert she's allowed to have, so they roll a die. If it lands 1 or 2, she's allowed fruit and only fruit. If it lands 3 or 4, she's allowed ice cream and only ice cream. If it lands 5 or 6, she's allowed cake and only cake. The die has just been cast, but we don't know how it landed. What is the probability that Alice is allowed to have ice cream or cake? What do we think? Yeah. What? Well, 2 out of 3. Yeah, exactly. So it has this 2 out of 3 inference, right? Now, if you had a semantic kind of free choice, that would say that possibly A or B, like she's allowed to have ice cream or cake, semantically entails she's allowed to have ice cream and she's allowed to have cake. And semantic entailment preserves likelihood. So, I mean, this is one of the Kolmogorov axioms. So there's a 2 in 3 chance that she's allowed to have ice cream or cake. On a semantic theory, it would predict that there's at least a 2 in 3 chance that she's allowed to have ice cream and cake. And she's allowed to have cake. Okay. But we know that no matter what happens, she's going to be allowed exactly 1 dessert, right? So there's no situation where she's allowed ice cream and allowed cake. But yeah, so it seems like there's a 2 in 3 reading. There might also be another reading where you say 0, because I don't know if you get this reading. For me, it's harder. Alice is allowed to have, like, what's the probability that Alice is allowed to have ice cream or cake? I don't know, somehow or gets the 3. And I say, well, no, she cannot choose, or, you know. So if you get, so the reading where it's 2 and 3 would be the flattened reading. And the reading where you plug in each disjunct independently would be this reading. It seems like both readings are available. So again, it's exactly parallel to the conditional case. We have, under probability operators, both readings seem to come out of the woods, you know, whereas in ordinary cases, it seemed we preferred the non-flattened reading for both conditionals and free choice inferences. Okay, so there you get free choice. Not only do you get free choice, but you get it in a way that you preserve these parallels between conditionals and possibility statements. Under negation, they preserve their strong readings. Under probability, they give rise to these ambiguities and the same kind of ambiguity. It also helps you account for the independence inferences. So recall the canasta example. You at this point of the game, you can take all or none of the cards, and I say you can take any collection of cards in the discard pile. That seemed false. And now, if we instead do conditional supposition, you would suppose, well, if you took like a collection of cards in the discard pile, would the rows be met? And the idea is that conditional selection function has this preference for keeping other things the same. So if you take some collection of cards, you're going to leave the other cards where they are. Just like if we haven't invited Alice or Bob to the party, and I say if you invite Alice, there's a default tendency to go to a world where we're inviting Alice, but Bob is still uninvited as he was in the actual world, right? So you keep as much things fixed from the actual world as you can get away with. And then, so when we suppose if you take any collection of cards in the discard pile, the other cards would be left where they are. And that's a case where the rows are not met. Okay. So you predict that the canasta example is not acceptable. Okay. So the reasoning here is not that there's some kind of embedded exclusive inference which we saw got us into all these problems about what happens with symmetric predicates, like swap a card with a teammate. Rather, you get this thing that looks like independence, it looks like exclusive interpolation, but it's just because the alternatives are independent. If you take some cards, then you're leaving other cards where they are. Like when I suppose if you took this collection of cards, then the other cards would still be left on the table. In a way, exhaustivity emerges as a kind of mirage of independence. In other cases, the things are not independent. For example, if bishop A meets a bishop, well, then you have some alternatives like bishop B meets a bishop. Well, that might go from false to true because it could be that A is meeting B. So it's just in the meaning of the antecedent that some of the alternatives there might change from false to true, so we don't have independence. If you go to the UK, one way to go to the UK is to visit Northern Ireland, but then this alternative, go to Ireland, would go from false to true as well, okay? Sorry, it should be false to true there in the handout. So the idea is that you get these exclusive inferences when the alternatives are independent, which means if you suppose one alternative, the other alternatives will keep their actual value. And in other cases where we saw there wasn't an exclusive inference, it was really just that there was dependence between the alternatives. If you suppose one alternative, the other alternatives might change their truth value too. Okay. And then we had all these examples with like, they're allowed to talk to each other, they're allowed to agree. So I just have this table, which is at this point pretty stipulative, for which sentences give rise to multiple alternatives, like which ones have this kind of structure where you have multiple maximal sets, and then some of them have this, just a single alternative. So disjunction is like the canonical case that gives rise to multiple alternatives. You might say at least also gives rise to alternatives. Some people have said that at least has a kind of existential meaning, or it has a disjunctive meaning, like at least n means n or more. Any gives rise to alternatives, they would be existential. To account for a Fine's case with Eve, you would have to say that infinitely many gives rise to alternatives. And then one observation is you can actually write the meaning of infinitely many in terms of existential quantification. Eve eats infinitely many apples is true just in case there is an infinite collection of apples such that Eve eats all of them. So you can unpack the meaning of infinitely many in terms of existential quantification if you want. But then we also have single alternatives like negation gives rise to a single alternative more than n. And then we saw that the positions of the switches agree as a single alternative. So we had two kinds of quantification happening with permission statements. You had the alternatives, like the alternatives for a disjunction would be the two disjuncts. They are treated universally. The statement has to hold for each alternative. But then when you suppose each alternative, we have this diamond box, like this diamond arrow, right? So we suppose that alternative, and as long as there's at least one case where the rules are met, the statement is good, okay? So you have this for all there is a structure. And that allows you to have your cake and eat it because you can get these strong readings of permission, like with disjunction, where you may A or B implies you may A and you may B. but also when you have a single alternative, then you're back to the existential semantics. So you have, are the positions of the switches allowed to agree? Well, yes, because if they agreed, we only consider a single alternative, and then we have this set with worlds where they are both up, worlds where they're both down, and worlds where they're both up are allowed, so it's okay. Or if they talk to each other at work, that gives rise to a single alternative. And within that alternative, we have talk in French, talk in English, and talking in French is okay. So the statement, like we have at least one case where the rules are met, but the statement is true. Okay, so you have this like narrow course between wanting universal realizability among the alternatives, like this universal quantification, but you also wanted to have coarseness. So the statement can be true even though some ways for it to happen are impermissible. Yeah, so that the dividing line between having this universal realizability or coarseness is exactly in which alternatives you give rise to. Okay. Anyway, so right now it's quite stipulative why some things generate multiple alternatives and other things don't. My answer would be, it seems like in all the cases where you have multiple alternatives, there's some kind of obvious existentially, disjunction-y quantification going on. So there's some kind of multiple realizability that is obvious or visible to the alternative generating mechanism. With single alternatives, yeah, you could obviously write these meanings in terms of eccentric quantification if you wanted to. You could say the switches agree just in case there is a position such that they both have it, right? But whatever eccentric quantification that is, it's not visible to the alternative generating mechanism. Or if you say talk to each other at work, that doesn't essentially quantify over like all the ways for us to talk to each other, like all the different languages. Okay, or other things like its node gives rise to a single alternative. That's because if I suppose that it snowed, I don't suppose all the ways for it to be snowing. Like we might say, if it snowed tomorrow, I would go skiing. That doesn't imply if it snowed 100 feet tomorrow, I would go skiing, like if I'm like buried in my house. So, but you can write the meaning of its node in terms of eccentric quantification. You could say its node means there is a snowing event. That's how they do it in event semantics, like David taught me in event semantics. Okay, but that eccentric quantification is not visible to the alternative generating mechanism. Okay, yeah, and so, you know, we had this challenge with logically equivalent sentences, challenge 3. The difference between Alice may buy, going back to 13, Alice may buy more than 4 tickets, Alice may buy 5 or more, is that Alice may buy four, like more than 4 has a single alternative. So you suppose if she buys more than 4, you get different worlds, and at least one of those is okay, so the sentence is good. 13A is fine. 13B, we have disjunction. Now we have multiple alternatives. Alice may buy 5 or more. For that to be true, it has to be true for each alternative. So buying 5, that's fine. But buying more than 5 is not fine. So we get this contrast with 13A and B, even though the statements are logically equivalent. They just differ in their alternative structure. Okay, so that's how I would account for the 3 challenges. So we're at 3 o'clock now. So yeah, I'll end here and be happy to take your questions and discuss this work further. So anyway, thanks so much for listening.